Have you ever felt like your prayers just hit the ceiling? Like you're calling out, but heaven just isn't picking up? That is the concept that I want to address today, this idea of what if God's silence is doing more than you think. But before we get into this, my name is Jacob, and I'm so grateful that you've taken some time to join us here on Theologetics. What I'd love for you to do before we get started, go ahead and click the subscribe button below. If this is your first time or not your first time around here, would love to see you coming back and getting this content in your inbox, as well as make sure to like the video to show YouTube, hey, I like this type of content. Also check out the Substack. We're going to be unpacking that today. So let's get into it. This whole idea of our prayers hitting the ceiling, heaven not picking up, it's really disorienting, especially for those of us who claim faith in Jesus and those who have been walking with God for a while. We expect God to speak, to move, and to comfort. And that's what the biblical record tells us that he does. But what happens when all we get is silence? Oftentimes that silence feels like absence, like abandonment, like rejection. It's like we're getting left on red. But the question we are diving into, what if God's silence is doing more than we think? Let's be honest, silence, it's hard for us. We are a modern people who live in a world of constant notifications, instant responses, and 24/7 access. Waiting feels like a punishment, and in silence feels like a failure. Think about Moses on the mountain, 40 days of silence. Or Elijah in the cave, not met with wind or fire, but with a whisper. Or even Job, drowning in grief and accusation, waiting chapters. Literally the entire book of Job is Job and his so-called friends going back and forth about these accusations, and then at the very end, God jumps in and finally speaks. But what I'm here to tell you is God's silence isn't the absence of activity. It's often the space where transformation begins. Here's what we often miss. Silence is not passive, it's pregnant. When God seems quiet, he may be forming something in us that noise could never achieve. Silence exposes the parts of our faith that depend on feelings, outcomes, or spiritual highs. It strips away the scaffolding and asks, do you still trust me? That's God asking us, do we still trust him? And this isn't punitive, it's not a punishment, it's actually purifying. As C.S. Lewis once noted, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. But sometimes even the megaphone itself is quiet. Why is that? Because sometimes the lesson isn't about what God says, but it's about how we listen. Let's shift the frame just for a moment. What if seasons of silence are not God's neglect, but actually his invitation to wait, like Simeon, who waited years to see the Messiah, then held him in his arms. Invitation to trust, like Mary, who didn't understand Gabriel and his announcement, but responded, let it be to me according to your word. Maybe it's an invitation to mature, because spiritual depth isn't forged in constant reassurance. It's forged in wrestling, in the even if he doesn't kind of faith. Now, don't get me wrong, as someone who's gone through this, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm currently going through this in my own life at the time of recording this video. It's not easy. It's honestly the opposite. Spiritual silence is one of the hardest parts and one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my Christian life. But it's also been one of the most sacred things I've encountered, because it's there in the silence that God often remakes our hearts. It's there that faith becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a resolve. And it's there that we learn the words of the psalmists. They're not just poetic, but they're honest. It says in Psalm 130, verse 5, I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. And one thing that I have learned in times of silence, in times of waiting, in what St. John of the Cross especially calls the dark night of the soul. Sometimes it's God holding up a mirror to us and saying, take a look. Here's how I'm making you into someone who's more like me, but we gotta figure out those things that need to change. You have to do your part while I'm doing my part as well. So if you're in a season where God feels silent, don't assume that he's absent. Don't assume that he's angry. And most importantly, don't assume that you're alone, because this silence, this aching, stretching, confusing quiet might just be the soil where trust grows roots. And trust, even in the dark, is a light that the silence cannot extinguish. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if this resonates with you, I invite you to read the full article on this on my Substack, Where Was God When I Needed Him Most? It's not a quick fix, but it is a faithful companion for your journey. And I just want you to remember, I close with this. God's silence is never the end of the story. Resurrection is always coming. New life. Something is coming, whether you're at the beginning, middle, or end of a season of just stuff. There is an end in sight. If you've enjoyed this or any of the other things that we've talked about on here, I'd love for you to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. You can go ahead and click that subscribe button below. You can also head over to the Substack where weekly I post, especially in this season where things may be a little bit more difficult than most. I post some faith stretching questions and explain them, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to look at the questions of culture through a redemptive and scriptural light. So go ahead and check that out. Would love for you to do that. It is also free to subscribe to that Substack as well. When you click on that link down below, you'll have the ability to put in your email. I appreciate you being on this journey with me, and I hope that this speaks to you and gives you some hope no matter where you are in this season.